Okay, I see that we are now live streaming, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We are truly humbled by the number of people who have joined us today. We had over 1,000 people register for this symposium, so hopefully everyone is able to see it. Thanks for joining us for a discussion of the University of California land grab, a legacy of profit from Indigenous land. My name is Rosalie Janitska-Fanchel, and I'm a PhD student in environmental science, policy, and management at UC Berkeley, and I'm also the staff program manager of the Berkeley Food Institute. I've had the honor to co-organize today's event along with Fenosha Bauerle and of Native American Student Development and Deborah Lustig of the Joseph Myers Center for Research on Native American Issues, along with many other amazing co-sponsors. So many of you were able to attend part 1 on September 25th, where we focused on the history of the 1862 Morrill Act that founded the land-grant university system across the US. Through the act, nearly 11 million acres of expropriated Indigenous land was sold to form endowments that still benefit the 114 land-grant institutions that exist today. I should say benefit some of those institutions, not all of them. We then focused on California's unique history of native dispossession and genocide, along with many other ended by setting the stage for today's forum, looking at the land that the University of California continues to own today. For those who missed part 1, it is available on YouTube, and I think that one of our tech team will drop that link in the chat. So today we are going to be looking towards the future. We will explore current university initiatives with tribes and engage in a community dialogue on actions that the University of California can address in our responsibility to Indigenous communities. Berkeley, Davis, Riverside, and the statewide Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources are the 4 entities within the University of California system that continue to receive federal funding as land-grant institutions. And so we are focusing on these institutions in our first panel. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers, and so we're really in for a treat today. So one piece of Zoom housekeeping. Because there's 300 people in this meeting, and there'll be hundreds more that are watching via the live stream, please keep your video and sound off. We ask you to turn your video off and stay muted, and unless you are one of the speakers. And we might be turning your videos off if we see it on. So thank you for understanding that, just so folks can see the speakers. So now I'm going to turn it over to Isha Ray, Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion for the UC Berkeley Rausser College of Natural Resources, who will be offering us a land acknowledgement. Thank you, Isha.
Thank you, Rosalie. Am I being heard? Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Before we begin this event, I'd like to take a moment with you all to recognize that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and to other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the UC Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of these lands since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and that we will work to hold the University of California, Berkeley more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. Together with UC Berkeley, UC Davis, and UC Riverside, our co-sponsors of today's event, we recognize that the land that Davis sits on has been the home of the Patwin people for thousands of years. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Catchil Dehe Band of Wintoon Indians of the Colusa Indian Community, Quetzal Dehe Wintoon Nation, and Yocha Dehe Wintoon Nation. The Patman people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many, many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are truly honored and grateful that some of you are joining us today from your traditional lands. Thank you. Our colleagues at Riverside would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of the land, water, and air their campus sits in, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luceño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff. We are most grateful to have you joining us from these homelands. We do hope that this event will open new ways to recognize and grapple with our own specific origins and roles within US higher education. As we learn, even before we existed as a university, our foundations began with sales of expropriated Indigenous lands across the area that we now call the state of California. Therefore, our land acknowledgement extends to recognize the many Native communities, not just in the locations where our physical university stands, but whose unceded ancestral lands were sold via the Morrill Act. Part of our ongoing project is to match historic documents to contemporary names in order to make visible more fully the university's responsibility to tribal communities. The history of US higher education is tied up in California's own unique history. The origins of our funding at UC and elsewhere rest on projects that participated in and were made possible by campaigns of genocide waged against Native Californian people, ancestors whose descendants are still alive with us here today. This concludes our land acknowledgement. Rosalie, back to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Isha. So now let us welcome our first panel on current initiatives between the UC system and California Indigenous communities. We will hear from 3 tribal leaders who will share with us their inspiring work to steward land and culture and to affirm sovereignty in their communities. We will also hear from research collaborators at UC. So if all of the speakers can turn their videos on, and the speakers for this first panel, I will now turn over to Clifford Trafsper, Clifford, Distinguished Professor of History and the Rupert Coster Chair of American Indian Affairs at UC Riverside. And it's Clifford who will be moderating our first panel.
Thank you, Rosalie. Nunanya Sa, Seminikam. Welcome, everyone. I'm honored to be a part of this program this morning and to be a part of this wonderful panel of individuals who are scholars in their own right, who do community-based work with tribes. I'm speaking to you today from Yucaipat. It is a Serrano and Gabrielino Tongva village, not far from Redlands, California, where I live. And we are also very close to the Chemehuevis who live east of us, as well as Cahuilla people. So I want to acknowledge them because we are living in their homeland. Today, we're going to hear some themes that resonate from the past to the present, that so much of Native history is not just to the past, but it is connected very much so to the present. So for example, we will be talking about land and resources. We will be talking about the sacred. These were things given to people through their creation accounts, their narratives and their stories that tell them who they are and that this place was a gift at the time of creation. We'll be talking about the theft of land, the theft of resources, the billions of dollars of resources that were taken from California Indians, stolen illegally in part through treaties, 18 treaties that were never ratified by the Congress, and then never told to the tribal people that they had no legal relationship with the United States because the treaties were never ratified. We're also thinking today about genocide. We heard that in the opening statement, but there was truly a genocide here in California. theft of land, there was rape, there was kidnapping of children, and the jailing of people, all in the name of taking California Indian land. Also, we're going to talk about reclamation today. You will hear from tribal leaders who are talking about the things they are doing to revitalize their lands, their resources, their people, and that there is a recovery afoot and has been for some time. So you will be part of that discussion. Also, you will hear about the relationship of the University of California to tribal nations, our partnerships that are taking place now, and hopefully will grow in the future with a new commitment by the University of California to reach out and work with our tribal communities. Now, I'm going to introduce all of the speakers at the same time, but ask the speakers to move things along and to move from one person to the next. Some of the speakers are in teams, so they will be going back and forth. But first, our first speaker will be the Honorable Valentine Lopez. Val Lopez is a colleague of mine. I've known him for some years, and we are colleagues on the University of California President's Native American Council, as are some of the other folks who are on the program today and who are listening in. He is the chairman of the Amamutsan tribe in the Santa Cruz area. Our second group of panelists, Jennifer Sauerwein, is an associate in the Cooperative Extension Environmental Sciences and Policy Management at the University of California, Berkeley. And she is teamed up with Bill Tripp. And Bill is a Karuk tribal member. He's a director of Tribal Natural Resources and Environmental Policies and co-founder of the UC Berkeley and Karuk Partnership or Collaborative. And then our last group will be the Honorable Ron Good. He is tribal chair at the North Fork Mono Tribe. He's a veteran of the United States Army. He's a former community college professor as well. And finally, Professor Beth Rose Middleton, my colleague at the University of California, Davis, who is a professor and chair of American Indian Studies. She's Yosha Dishe endowed chair. But like all of the panelists, Beth Rose has a relationship with the tribes, and she does community-based work and reaches out to provide Native voices in her work to allow Native people to speak for themselves as they will today. I'm asking all the speakers to be mindful of the time, and we will begin now with Val Lopez. Val?
Thank you much, Cliff, and thank you everyone for attending here, and I give honor and blessings to those who are speaking today, to you and your people and all your descendants and future and ancestors. I believe I have 10 minutes, and if I can have that verified, that'd be nice. I was listening to the introductions and stuff like that, and they talked about the theft of land. And I have to say that the theft of land did not begin here in California, and it did not begin in the United States. So I'm going to give you like 1 or 2 minutes of quick history on how we perceive that. In 1453, Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull that said all indigenous people are heathens, pagans, and savages. That indigenous people have no soul. And if you have no soul, you're not a human being. And if you're not a human being, they can enslave you, they can kill you, they can rape you, they can torture you, brutalize you, and it's not a sin. It is not a sin. The papal bulls also said that all indigenous people were the enemies of Jesus Christ. That indigenous people were to be put into perpetual slavery, and our land and our possessions were to be taken from us. And that is exactly what happened, and that continued throughout the indigenous world and California. So let's not forget about that period of history when we talked about the theft of land. In 1823, well, there was one other papal bull passed in 1493, and that was called the Doctrine of Discovery. And the Doctrine of Discovery encouraged Christian European nations to go out and discover these new lands and to claim them for their country and to turn the indigenous people into citizens of their European country and to be Christian, or they were to be killed. Well over 100, possibly 200 million indigenous people died around the world as a result of those papal bulls that were issued with the moral authority of the Catholic Church and the Pope. That's a very important part when we talk about the theft of land. Let's not forget about that. That is exactly what happened. A lot of people want to, whenever people look at our lands, when a lot of people look at our lands are very lush. We have plenty of resources. We're very fortunate. We see our people are very blessed by the Creator. We have the lands of the Morgan Hill, Gilroy, Hollister areas, Santa Cruz, south of we're south of San Jose. There's plenty of resources, waters, lakes, rivers, the oceans, and wildlife, etc. Our creation story tells us that Creator gave us a responsibility to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. And for thousands and thousands of years, that's exactly what our people did. We took care of the rivers and kept them clean. So for the fish, for the migrating fish, etc. We took care of the plants. We took care of the insects, the birds, the four-legged, the finned, the winged. Those were all our responsibilities. We did not try to dominate the plants and the animals or the streams or anything. That was not our responsibility. Creator made the earth and the world, Mother Earth, perfect. And it was our responsibility to maintain that sacredness of the lands. Therefore, we had prayers and ceremonies, songs, etc., to maintain that sacredness. Then came the brutal periods, the Spanish mission period, the Mexican period, the American period, and all three periods of brutal colonization. All three periods of brutal colonization. They wanted to destroy our spirituality. They wanted to destroy our culture, our environments, our indigenous knowledge, our humanity. It was a forced assimilation or die policy they had. And that was brutal. And in the missions, they would separate the men from the children from the women. They did not want that indigenous knowledge to pass on to the others. And a husband and wife couldn't get back together again unless they became citizens of Spain and they accepted the teachings of the Catholic Church. And they agreed to convert to Christianity. Then they can get their families back together again. If they didn't do that, they would never be, the families could never come back together again. In Mission San Juan Bautista, that mission was established in 1797. In 1823, 26 years later, there was they sent out a questionnaire asking for statistics from the missions. And one of the questions they asked is how many deaths were there? And they reported that 19,421 Indians had died at Mission San Juan Bautista in 26 years, 19,421. That is our history. And that continued through the Mexican period, and it continued through the California American period. Talk about the land now. They say, that the land was sold. Well, whoever sold it was selling stolen land. Let's never forget that. Every morning you wake up and you put your feet on the ground. You're putting your feet on land that was stolen. Land that was stolen. Don't ever forget that. Every morning, think of that. You're putting your feet on land that was stolen. If someone was to steal a wallet and then sell it to someone else and sell it to someone else and sell it to someone else and say, where'd you get that wallet from? Say, I bought that from Robert. I bought it from Robert. That doesn't make it that person's. That wallet is, or that purse, whatever the item was, that item was still stolen. And it will always be stolen until it's returned to its rightful owner. That's true for the land today. That is true for the land today. It's important that we think of that every day and we remember that. Our tribe doesn't blame the people attending this seminar for the theft of that land or for the brutality towards our people. A lot of people say, well, I wasn't the one that did it. We're not going to argue with you on that. You are not the ones that did that. But you must recognize that you benefit every day. You benefit every single day from that stolen land, from that theft, and the destruction of our culture, and the destruction of our indigenous knowledge. You benefit every day from that. What we ask the people of today is to help us restore our culture, restore our spirituality, restore our rights to the land, allow us to return to the path of our ancestors, the path that was given to us by Creator, the path that we have the moral authority to fulfill, the moral authority and the moral responsibility to fulfill, to steward these lands in the ways that was given to our ancestors by Creator, to steward these lands and to take care of them. You look at, I look at Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz sits on 3,200 acres of land. 3,200 acres. I believe it's the largest holding of land of any university for a campus area. You know, when they built the university, they found they uncovered a number of ancestors from our tribe, and they kept them. They kept them. Under NAGPRA, they kept them, and we got them returned last August of 2019. We worked through the NAGPRA process, and we got a return to our tribe. We're very thankful for that. The point is though, that land is still stolen. And universities have the responsibility to acknowledge that theft and to work with tribes to allow and to see how they can work to bring the tribes back, get them involved, to return native traditional stewardship, let them take care of the plants and the animals, let them have a say on the traditional ways of access to their sacred sites that are on those campuses and their cultural sites and their gathering sites. Restore the hunting and fishing rights to tribes. There's a lot that needs to be done. There's a long way to go. Maybe that first step is taken, maybe it hasn't. But it's time to move down that path, and it's time to move down that path together. The tribes need to work together to make this happen, and we will. But we need to find ways to return to our lands to fulfill our obligations to Creator. I'll stop there. This is not what I was going to talk about, but that's what I had to say. Thank you.
All right, if we can go to our next speaker. Jennifer.
Yeah, hi, I'm trying to open up my video.
Okay.
Oh,
thank you.
Great. Thank you, Val, so much for such a moving presentation. Really powerful words and powerful lessons for all of us to carry forward in our work. So thank you so much. So again, my name is Jennifer Sauerwein, and I am a cooperative extension specialist in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management at UC Berkeley. Today, I'm going to share some examples of how UC Cooperative Extension is working to strengthen partnerships with Native American communities, including the Kaduk Berkeley Collaborative that my colleague Bill Tripp from the Kaduk Tribe and I will be sharing with you today. But first, I wanted to take a moment to explain a little bit about what cooperative extension is for those of you who are less familiar. So cooperative extension is essentially the outreach branch of the land grant university that was founded under the Morrill Act that we learned about in part 1 of the workshop series. Our responsibility is to ensure that the research being conducted at our land grant, the University of California, is relevant to our California public. Created by the Smith-Lever Act in 1914, the mission of Cooperative Extension today is to connect the power of UC research in agriculture, natural resources, nutrition, and youth development with local communities to improve the lives of all Californians. Our network extends across the state at both the campus and the county level, with campus-based faculty and specialists like myself conducting research primarily at the 3 Ag Experiment Station campuses. That's Berkeley, Davis, and Riverside. We also have advisors and community educators doing research and program delivery at the county level. We also have 9 research and extension centers, as well as 12 statewide programs that are all carrying out the mission of UC Agriculture and Natural Resources. For example, 4-H, the Master Gardener Program, Cal Naturalist, and others, as you can see here. So as we learned in the first session, and we heard just from Val right now, UC was founded upon the dispossession of Indigenous lands. Given that our mission is to serve all our California communities, we have a responsibility to deepen our understanding of and own that history, but also to recognize that over 720,000 Native peoples across the state are flourishing members of our urban and rural communities. And we have a responsibility and an opportunity to strengthen partnerships with our Native communities in meaningful ways. So how is Cooperative Extension engaging with Native communities? In 2016, we conducted a survey of 300 A&R employees and found that 84% were aware of tribes and tribal organizations in their areas, and 30% were working with tribes. There was also a strong desire to learn more about Native history, cultural norms, contemporary tribal life, and a desire to learn how to do better and more effective outreach with Native American communities. So in response to that demand, we developed 2 professional development workshops for our A&R colleagues, where we learned largely from Native presenters, and you can see Val here on the left was one of the terrific contributors. And we learned about all different topics related to California Indian history, how to build relationships, contemporary tribal life and cultural practices, Indigenous cultural burning and land stewardship, and much more. So inspired by the interest in the outcomes of the workshop, we established the UC A&R Native American Community Partnerships Workgroup to support ongoing professional development, shared learning opportunities, evaluation and development of resources to facilitate ongoing research and outreach. Now I'm going to share just a few examples of cooperative extension programs that are currently working to strengthen partnerships with Native American communities, and there's many more as well. Last year, following a workshop on dismantling racism in the food system, a group of us became interested in understanding and mapping the Moral Act parcels, which resulted in a similar data set that was shared by Robert Lee and Tristan Atone, as well as an interactive map where you can explore specific Moral Act parcels in California with overlays of Indigenous territories. And I encourage you to check out the map here on the right. On the eastern side of the Sierra, Dustin Blakey and Aaron DiCaprio worked with local tribes to provide food safety training and develop food safety plans for the tribe's 6 food sovereignty gardens, reducing food safety risk to vulnerable populations. In partnership with the Wishtoyo Chumash Foundation, UC California Naturalist Program incorporated Indigenous perspectives into an 11-week course designed specifically for California coastal Native nations and communities. They now have a robust network of 40 certified Cal Naturalists representing 30 tribes and working with 35 Native and community-based organizations. This program is a wonderful example of amplifying the value of traditional ecological knowledge, both within the scientific context and within Native communities. CalFresh Healthy Living UC offers nutrition education, food resource management, and physical activity to those who are eligible for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program called SNAP, which was previously known as food stamps, in 32 counties through cooperative extension offices. Since 2016, they developed a Native American work group and have been partnering more closely with tribes and organizations serving Native communities on the development of trauma-informed nutrition education, garden-enhanced learning, and engaging youth in participatory action research. I'm now going to describe a collaborative that I helped found with Ron Reed, Bill Tripp, and others from the Kaduk tribe and UC Berkeley faculty and students in 2007 that seeks to leverage UC resources and scientific collaborations to support the Kaduk tribe's ecocultural revitalization initiatives and youth development goals. Motivated by the long history of injustices and extractive nature of academic research with California Indian tribes, a central aim of our collaborative is to rebuild trust with a commitment to restoring tribal sovereignty over ancestral lands, cultural resources, and knowledge. We strive to do this by listening, by decentering the role of the university as the expert, and by centering Indigenous knowledge, following the lead of our tribal partners as research colleagues. We honor tribal oversight, ensuring that all the work that we do benefits the tribes, tribal trust resources, and their communities. And to ensure the protection of cultural and intellectual property, we co-created a research protocol and process that the tribe can use to govern all research and collaborative projects that respects and protects cultural knowledge and tribal sovereignty. We use a community-based participatory research approach to our work, in which our tribal partners are engaged in all aspects of the research and decision-making from start to finish, including co-creating the research questions, conducting the research, interpreting the results, and co-producing all publications and other materials from our work together. So putting these principles to action, our first big project funded by the USDA was launched in 2012 and focused on enhancing tribal health and food security in the Klamath River Basin. It was a large collaborative project co-led by 3 tribes, the Forest Service, and other nonprofit partners that sought to understand the causes of food insecurity and to support tribal-led solutions. Integrating cultural perspectives into our research, we found that 92% out of 711 survey respondents experienced some level of food insecurity, compared with 12% nationally. And that having access to native foods such as deer, elk, salmon, and acorns was a strong predictor of food security. However, only 7% had reliable access due to limited availability, resulting from a long history, as we heard earlier, of resource degradation associated with colonization, including logging, dams, and fire suppression, and the criminalization of traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering, as well as Indigenous stewardship practice, including cultural burning. Related to this, in fact, today, tribes in the Klamath River Basin and allies are mobilizing a call to action to undam the Klamath to restore the salmon runs. To improve household food sovereignty, the grant dedicated a significant portion of the funds to support over 380 community-led workshops, family camps, and community events focused on native food gathering, processing, canning, gardening, cooking, and a whole host of other activities, which had measurable impacts, not only on improving household food security, but also strengthening community well-being and self-reliance through intergenerational learning. We also supported the establishment of the Kaduk Tribe's Pikyaf Field Institute, which we'll hear more about from Bill, which is dedicated to ongoing workforce and youth development and partnering with collaborative academic institutions to enhance job creation, environmental education, and to bridge Western and Indigenous science to support long-term co-management goals within the Kaduk ancestral homelands. In support of those goals, the collaborative is now working to set up a long-term research plots in areas that are actively managed by the tribe to measure and monitor the effects of tribal forest management with cultural burning and other cultural practices on the productivity, the accessibility, and the resilience of cultural foods. We hope the tools that we're creating that integrate Indigenous and Western science perspectives can support the tribe's ongoing monitoring of cultural plants in these plots under changing climate conditions and land management scenarios. And we hope that the results can support expanding the tribe's cultural stewardship practices across their ancestral territory. For more information about the collaborative, to learn more about our principles and our projects, please visit our website. And now I have the privilege and honor of introducing Bill Tripp, my friend, colleague, and Director of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy at the Kaduk Tribe, who is also a leading voice for returning Indigenous fire to the land to mitigate the catastrophic fires that Val was describing and Cliff earlier that we've been experiencing across the state. Bill will share more about the past, present, and future opportunities through our collaborative. Thanks very much.
Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. The dispossession of land is not the only issue Indigenous peoples face. The Kaduk people didn't even understand the concept of land ownership until when first contact occurred. It is the change in our relationship among humans and the natural world that has affected us the most as Indigenous peoples. We are working through the Kaduk UCB Collaborative, among many other partnerships, to meet our ecocultural revitalization goals and connect our human responsibility to place. 10 minutes is not a lot of time, so I'll touch on a few points regarding the past, present, and future of the Kaduk UCB Collaborative model and propose a way to build back an era of recognition, reconciliation, and ecocultural revitalization. The mission of the Kaduk UC Berkeley Collaborative, as founded in 2007, is to foster synergistic collaborations between the Kaduk Tribe and UC Berkeley and additional partners working with them to enhance the ecocultural revitalization of the people and landscapes within Kaduk ancestral lands and territories. Practicing Pikyav became our guiding policy. Within this policy are the following principles: the principle of community engaged scholarship, the principle of free, prior, and informed consent, the principle of benefits to the tribal community, the principle of mentorship training, youth development, the principle of confidentiality, the principle of mutual respect, inclusiveness, and empowerment, the principle of equity and reciprocity, the principle of self-determination, prior rights, and inalienability, the principle of respecting Indigenous knowledge and intellectual property, and the principle of Pikyav and appropriate conduct. Pikyav meaning to fix it. For the past 13 years, we have been building relationships, telling stories, and learning to understand each other under these principles. Ultimately, we created a lot of process that can be sometimes all-consuming, but nonetheless, our process built trust. It enabled a lot of progress towards our ecocultural revitalization goals. Our collective past has brought us to a present where we now say "Jus nuesti," meaning we are caring for it. We are working together in partnership with the water, the fish, the wildlife, the plants, and each other. At a certain point, maintaining these relationships requires us to revamp our organizational structure. We broke the Department of Natural Resources into 3 branches: the Administration and Development Branch, the Watersheds Branch, and the Ecocultural Revitalization Branch. These are comprised of 9 integrated program areas. Though they all have relevance to the whole, it is the Ecocultural Revitalization Branch that was established to move the discussion as it relates to upslope management. where the watersheds branch has more of an in-stream focus. For now, let's dig deeper into the Ecocultural Revitalization branch. It is constructed of 3 integrated program areas: integrated wildland fire management, collaborative stewardship, and the Breakout Field Institute. Further breaking down the Breakout Field Institute, it consists of higher education and research, food security and food sovereignty, workforce development and internships, K-12 environmental education, and the SIPNUC Digital Library, Archive, and Museum Services. 2 of the current partnerships that parallel and help bring focus to experiential learning in an intergenerational context to the Cudahy-UCB Collaborative are the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership and the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network of the Cudahy, Yurok, and Hoopa peoples. In working together across vast landscapes, we work hard not to draw lines between us, but instead respect the hard lines among us. We have found that it is our shared values that provide the space to test our own resolve. The need to revitalize our human relationships with fire is at the center of these shared values emerging through our work together. But are we too late to act on this? No, we are at a turning point. Wildfires are burning at a scale of intensity unprecedented in our written and oral histories. Every fire narrative you see discusses the fact that Indigenous peoples use fire for millennia. But this message isn't always delivered with sincere intent to revitalize Indigenous knowledge, practice, and belief systems. In some cases, it seems more of a means to co-opt the last little bits of who we are as Indigenous peoples so states, counties, and federal agencies can change it to suit their needs and throw out the parts they don't wish to accept. This is the sort of hard line I cannot respect, nor is it a strategy that would be effective for the long run. As Indigenous peoples, our present situation provides us with a choice to go it alone, get run over, and watch the natural world enter a time of suffering, ultimately leading to the potential demise of human existence. A choice to give our knowledge away and watch the current trajectory shift towards economic gain of individuals instead of the whole, which would only delay this suffering and ultimately prolong the timelines of aforementioned demise. Or truly work together in fulfilling the human responsibility to the land, the water, the fish, the wildlife, the plants, and the people. The latter is my hope, and I see this conversation we're having today to have some of the greatest potential to make it happen. Our collective foundations are strong. Our message is timely. Our collective capabilities are essentially endless. But as much as we know, we have a lot to learn. Full integration of our collective knowledge, practice, and belief systems will be needed if we are to accomplish what may very well seem to be impossible. There are solutions to be found in the Moral Act, which is what inspired me to join this conversation today. The present legacy of land grant institutions is that of dispossession, disenfranchisement, and indigenous erasure. But we can change that. The presence of so many people on this webinar today is an indication that we are ready to change that legacy, and we have the means to make it one of recognition, reconciliation, and revitalization. The Moral Act created the means for state legislature to authorize the sale of land stolen from Indigenous peoples. The state of California authorized the establishment of the UC system. The UC system built an endowment of over $13.4 billion. The only thing the Moral Act required is that it target a 5% return and it educate people in the agricultural and mechanical arts while developing the workforce needed for the future. 1% of the revenue this year alone amounts to $143 million. $143 million can generate $6.4 million worth of annual endowed action in perpetuity. That kind of money could stand up 2 to 3 Indigenous field institutes almost immediately. All it would take is the willingness of the UC system and the strike of a pin in the California legislature in January. People want to learn from Indigenous peoples how to live in harmony with our environment. Let's do just that. But let's do it in a way that reverses the systemic injustices plaguing our Indigenous communities, that works to address the effects of climate change, that protects our communities from an era of megafires, and most importantly, builds upon what we know together to achieve Indigenous agroecosystem resilience throughout California. There are coalitions of people that are primed and ready to make it happen. We just need to do it. We need to endow action now. Yotwa.
Thank you, Bill. And now if we could hear from Ron and Beth Rose.
Good morning, Manahut, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us this morning. I'm honored to follow this wonderful panel. I really appreciate what Bill Tripp just said, endow action now, and I hope we are moving forward toward that in this conversation. Really grateful to be speaking alongside Chairman Ron Good this morning, and we are going to be talking about a couple of current initiatives in land stewardship. And I'll start with a few slides about our work with the Maidu Summit Consortium in the Northeastern Sierra, and then Ron and I will talk about our fire workshops in the Southern Sierra. So this is Humbug Valley, or Tasmam Koyam. I'd like to recognize and respect Maidu Summit members who may be online, who have never stopped fighting for the stewardship and return of these homelands in the Northeastern Sierra. This valley is a very culturally important place, and it's one of several mountain meadows that was not flooded for hydroelectric development. Big Meadows here nearby was flooded. This is near Komumanim, or Mount Lassen in the background, but this was a meadow just like this one, but it was flooded for hydro development. Over the process of the Stewardship Council land divestiture, the Maidu Summit Consortium was able to regain title to Tasmam Koyam, or Humbug Valley. And we have been able to work with them from UC Davis with our students. And I see it as very empowering for our students to be able to collaborate, to do hands-on learning, to respond to community needs, interests. It really helps increase Native student retention and well-being. This is part of a small fellowship program that I developed with Keir Johnson at the Intertribal Agricultural Council and Raina Rogers at Natural Resources Conservation Service to support students to do collaborative work regarding natural resources with tribes. And so in this partnership in Northeastern California, the Arboretum is involved, as students have been engaged in gathering seed from culturally important plants that the Maidu Summit and partners would like to restore in the landscape, growing out those seeds in the UC Davis Arboretum, and then bringing them back up to the mountains and doing planting together and then returning to care for the plants. And this is one example of a planting day last year or the year before. And Ben Cunningham, Maidu Summit board chair there, and then Ellen Sanders Rigosa, who's one of the students who was really one of the first working on this project, growing out elderberry, yarrow, and other native plants, putting them back on the landscape. And now working with Abby Hart, and these are all students. She is a master's student in ecology, collaborating with the Maidu Summit to restore an oak grove in an area that had been over-harvested by PG&E prior to the land transfer. So all of this work speaks to the importance of educating future environmental managers in connection with supporting native land restoration, return of lands to tribes, and supporting some of the initiatives that Bill Tripp and Jenny Sauerwein were talking about. I feel strongly that that many of the students who are educating in ecology as well as other fields need to be trained in building respectful collaborations, and that there should be funding for collaborative land restoration, and there should be funding for land transfer, facilitating land access and jurisdiction to Indigenous peoples and coalitions. And as other speakers have, I just refer to the dire nature of what's happening, the climate change that's happening, especially in this region, increasing drought and heat and fire danger. And part of that led us to develop this Keepers of the Flame course. And I'll just mention its principles and then pass it over to Chairman Good to speak. But the goal here, and this was created with collaborators, graduate students, some of whom have now graduated, Chris Adlam, Melinda Adams, Denise Martinez, developing this course, Keepers of the Flame. It's a field course, it's collaborative. Our goal is to support Indigenous-led burning initiatives, to work with reciprocity, recognizing Indigenous expertise, and students have really appreciated this class and being able to be out on the land, learning with people and contributing to these projects. So Ron, I'll pass it to you here.
Thanks, Beth Rose. I do want to chime in with our previous speakers and just thank you guys for wonderful talk. I do want to make mention that I was one of the lead opponents to the UC system here in Fresno County for the little township of Academy, in which eventually we got it moved to Merced. But here we had over 72 sites, and about 45 of them were burial sites that they would have been putting the university on top of. So it was a long, hard fight, but we beat them and got it moved out of here. Unbeknownst, of course, to the Clovis and Fresno cities and Fresno County, who have put up about $9 million to have that university here. Just as a side note, all three of them have been attacking me and my family for about the last 20 years since then on a number of issues, personal and on broader scopes. Wherever they can, they have never let me forget that I opposed them, but that's the way it is. So moving along a little bit to where we are, I know we're short on time. So one of the, where we've been putting fire on the ground in our areas and counties. I work with 4 different counties: Mariposa, Madera, Fresno, and Tulare. And we've been utilizing restoration practices and fire as a tool since 1991. We started with the Forest Service in 2003, and hopefully this coming year, we have what we call a master agreement with the Forest Service, in which we will be doing and conducting our own burning on the forest. This will be a first, and I have tribes throughout California, agencies throughout California, as well as throughout the United States, Wisconsin and Florida, who are watching and wanting to see this implemented. And when we do, I'm sure it'll move throughout the United States. One of the things here that we are burning with UC Davis and in our Mariposa property, it's about 400 acres of privately owned land, which is my family, my wife's family, and then but it was a Miwok, Mariposa Miwok people live there. It's their land, and so at one point in time where we burn, it's about a 40 to 50 acre village site, and we estimated that there are some 600 to possibly even 1,000 people live there at one point in time, which is huge for a village. But we have between 28 and 35 cultural features on the site and many different medicine rocks. And so we're going to keep up our work there. I want to say that we work with a number of universities. I work with the Middlebury Institute out of Monterey. I work with Kenyatta College. I work with Berkeley at UC Davis, Chico, Fresno State, Fresno City College. And I bring the students in and professors in this next burn that we'll be doing this coming year. I have University of Montana State wanting to come in as well. And so, and I had Arizona State there last year as well. So, hey, things are really growing. And so we try to bring not only the professors and the students in so that they will have an opportunity to see where we're at. We're showing you in front here a nice, pretty redbud bush. Unfortunately, that redbud bush is at the end of its age, and so it is no longer a useful resource other than it looks pretty. But hey, as we all grow older, we all start to look prettier, right? And so that's the way it is. However, we brought the UC Davis folks in, and this is my wife here in the front with me, and we proceed to burn what needs to be replaced. Our burning practices is what is known as cultural burning. That's only a recent terminology. We just used fire. We used fire from wildfire. We managed wildfire. Cultural burning is a form of prescribed fire. And but I don't like to get them mixed up between what the agencies called prescribed fire, simply because they have a whole different agenda and concept of why they're burning and what they're burning for. What we're burning for and why we burn is to rejuvenate the land, to restore the vegetation, and to bring new life back to this same vegetation that is either dying or died, but we can revive it and bring it back. And this is my nephew, Jess, that's been working with me for the last 10 years and keeping him well trained. He can do just about everything I can do right now, maybe more in that other slide. So again, we go through and work the land and get it burnt down so that the resources can come back. And that's the key element here, is what we're after. Go ahead, click another one. One of the back picture there just gives you a better idea that all these bedrocks that are out here, they all have sites connected to them. There's mortars and slicks and medicine holes and everything out there. Long ago, the people burned their village area. You have to understand that they had to burn their village area. They had that to keep this open. If and when a wildfire did come, where were they going to go? How are they going to protect themselves? So not only to this factor, but they had to keep their trails open. And you saw where Bill Tripp had his maps out and he had his trails throughout his lands. That is one of the key things that we are currently doing, is we are recording our entire trail system through our homeland. The North Fork Walnut Tribe's homeland is 1.2 million acres. And so we are recording all of our trail systems right now and mapping them out. Go ahead, Beth. This is what it looks like after 9 months return. And then, we're looking for the sourberry to have a good product. And, it should look healthy like this. This year we had a very good harvest from our burning that we've been doing out there. Is there any more pictures? So our elders have come out and gathered sticks from the plants that we've been restoring, redbud and sourberry. They'll be able to make several baskets and teach a lot of their younger ones how to do this. Passing along a little tradition. This is my daughter, and back when she was changing baskets, they first go in the first little basket called little pasuk, and then they end up going into the bigger basket called a hoop. And so this is my grandmother. So it'd be her great grandmother that had the opportunity to change her from one basket to another. And of course, this is my father. And my father was the first basket maker in the state of California to ever receive the Master Artist Award from the National Endowment of the Arts because of his work with his basketry, and is quite a legend. When we're here, like I said before, we have numerous colleges that I bring in. I have between 8 and 12 different tribes are represented who come over and help us, and a number of other community folks as well. This past February, we had over 100 volunteers. I had so many people that I had to turn away for the next burn. And so I'm probably pretty full already, but I still have numerous people looking to come down and give us a hand.
So I think I might just add, we're really grateful to be able to collaborate with Ron, with Chairman Good and others here. And it's been really moving and impactful for students. These are just a few quotes from a survey we did of the impact of them being able to be collaborating at the Tending and Gathering Garden at the Cache Creek Nature Preserve with the steering committee there, Diana Almendarez and Pam Gonzalez and Ardith Reed and others, as well as collaborating with Ron in the Southern Sierra. So it's definitely been very positive and really life-changing for students, Native and non-Native students. Ron, would you like to talk a little bit about addressing policy?
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes here, and then I got to move to another class. We have every area throughout California, and it's one of the things that I've been working on statewide to try to get some uniformity to CAL FIRE and Air Pollution Board. I'm on a collaborative down here called the Dinky Collaborative, in which we were able to get the San Joaquin Air Pollution Board to allow agencies that when they're fire, and this includes cultural burning, when you start a fire, you can finish it. In the past, before 2017, you had to put the fire out if it was a bad air day. So that was a big improvement for all of our folks down here. I burn up in Mariposa, that's a different air pollution board, and they have a whole different concept of allowing people to burn. So I have a burn permit in which I am able to burn any day, basically during the burn season, which is January to June. If it's a non-burn day or a bad air day, and I still have something scheduled, I'm still burning. This hasn't been true for some of the other areas who have set up events to burn and then get told that they can't burn today because it's a bad day to burn. I had a little bit of problem last year for the first time in about 6 years, maybe new people on board or whatever, but in any event. So these are things that we are still struggling with today to ensure that we are able to burn. And then, like I said earlier, that there is the three concepts of wildfire management: prescribed burning and cultural burning. And cultural burning, as I already explained, is a renewal of life. Prescribed fire, what's put on by, agencies such as forest and park, theirs is for fuel reduction, and their bottom agenda is to make sure that their best economic development product is given the best chance for it to grow. And then wildfire management, of course, is what we're doing right now with many of these wildfires. They're having the opportunity to burn through in low severity, so they're getting acreage, and acreage is what counts when they are doing prescribed fire or wildfire management. So those are big differences, but not to misunderstand that Native people used all three.
Ron, this is Cliff. Pardon me for interrupting, but before you have to go, would you help us with this question? If a UC campus, professors, administrators would like to establish a cooperative relationship with a tribe, can you share with us some first steps?
Well, first steps, of course, is one of the things that we have done is to either present to various classes like your fire classes or your ecology classes, and then to see where the real interest, lies. But more than that, when you come out, I don't mind volunteers. I love volunteers. But, it costs a lot of money. And so to put on a 4-day event with 100 people runs about $8,000. And, if I've got some good pockets like Beth and some of the Arizona folks were able to help us this past year, works out pretty good. But most of that money ends up coming out of my pocket. But, so when you're working with these different places, they also got to be able to reach into their pockets to get their students out here on the land and learning. But there's no better way than to get them right there on the land and get a better understanding of what we're talking about.
Very good. I have a question for Bill. Bill, you spoke about interrelationships with other tribes. Would you speak to this issue a little bit more? For example, in my area, we have a number of Kauai tribes and each tribe has their own issue, but how was it that you were able to pull people together to form a collaborative, an intertribal collaborative?
Well, we've been neighbors for a long time. We share similar ceremonies, similar cultures, similar histories, even though we have 3 completely different language families. And so, we started out developing, the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership piece. It was kind of an extension of multiple activities that we were trying to pull together to change the way things are done in our territory. And so we ended up just to the point where we were going to pull the plug and just probably spend the rest of our lives in court against federal agencies. But the Nature Conservancy stepped in to provide some facilitation. And so we've got through that process, quite an extensive process, and are now managing about 5,500 acres of the Somes Bar Integrated Wildland Fire Management Project, where the tribe and our partners are doing it all together. But early on in that discussion, we recognized that that we really should be investing in tribally led intertribal efforts, and so the Nature Conservancy, family of networks decided to add to the list of networks that they worked an Indigenous Peoples Bring network, and so we came together and started having the conversation, and built out a healthy country plan together, modeled after some of the ones that are done in Australia these days.
Thank you, Bill. And Val, I have a question for you, or I'd like your thoughts on this. With the land theft, the billions of dollars worth of resources taken by California and the United States, leaving most tribes very poor for many years. What are your thoughts about the University of California reaching out to the tribes and with educational programs to channel your students into the University of California and providing them financial aid?
Thank you, Cliff. As I said, what I talked about was not what I had planned at all. Our tribe, we do have a lot of relationships with a number of universities, and we're working hard to move things forward and stuff like that. Our tribe, all California tribes have lost a lot regarding their culture, their lands, and just so much more. And at times, it's just important for people to understand those truths, and that's what I was trying to express there. We do have to find a path forward. We know that the people are not going to pack up and go home, and that's not going to happen. We do need to find a path forward, and our tribe has developed a lot of MOUs and relationships with universities, with state and federal bureaus and departments, and et cetera, the Department of Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, state parks, et cetera. So, we have a lot of those relationships, and we have our relationships with the universities. What we look for is MOUs that give us rights to gather, to steward, to hold ceremony, to protect our cultural and sacred locations, and our sacred sites. We also have asked that we be allowed to, we do surveys and we try to identify our native plants so we can start working to restore those. Those are our native foods. There's 8 different types of California Indian potato, for example. If someone was to go to a store and say, I'd like to buy you some Indian potatoes, no one would know what the heck they're talking about. Our food source, our food plants have been wiped out, and we want to restore our foods. And so we're asking for help to help us restore our cultures and stuff like that. Having the universities recognize the responsibility to work with tribes, to help them, regain a lot of the knowledge and the rights that they had lost is so important. And you talked about the universities helping them with the students with scholarships and stuff like that. That's a wonderful part of it. That, of course, and you're not saying this, but that by itself is not all that's needed. There's so much more. But we have to find a way to get together, and they have to be meaningful actions. We've heard too many apologies and et cetera. We're sorry, with no follow-up action. And that doesn't mean anything to us anymore. We have to sit down and come to some agreement and have some good, honest talks. And we need to heal. We need to heal from that brutal history that we experienced. But the perpetrators and these institutions are perpetrators in many ways, not in many ways, but they are perpetrators. And the perpetrators need to heal as well. And if we can ever have a healthy relationship, it must take 2 healthy partners. How can you have a healthy relationship if one partner is not healthy? based on the policy and the regulations and the processes that they have and the restrictions that they have on tribes. How can that be a healthy relationship? We have to find a point where tribes are healthy and institutions are healthy, and then we can have a healthy relationship and go forward. But until the institutions are healthy and tribes are healthy, we will not go forward. And I don't know if that makes sense, Cliff, but I think that right there is kind of the most important thing, is finding ways to heal together. And the scholarship is a part of it. You know, helping access to the lands of the universities hold, helping us work to get changes to laws and stuff like that that will protect our sacred sites on our cultural sites, et cetera. Those are all very important steps. And there's many other additional steps that must be found and taken.
Thank you, Val. We only have a few minutes, but I was hoping that in a minute or two, that Beth Rose, Jennifer, you might make some suggestions to faculty members how we as UC people might reach out to tribes. Beth Rose.
Thank you. I would say it's really about listening, trying to find common ground, areas of interest, and areas where, where we can be part of bridging those gaps, addressing that history, and also in particular supporting Native California students in particular, as well as other students, all students who want to work with tribal members. But I have really seen the moving nature of being able to support California Native students in working with tribes in California on these land stewardship initiatives. And as Ron alluded to, raising the funds is really important to be able to meaningfully support that and to acknowledge the expertise of collaborators and support their time. I've been really blessed with support from the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center and Yochadihi to fund some of these initiatives. So I would just say respect, support, and bringing resources to the table and listening.
Thank you. Rosalie, do we have time for one more response?
Yes, Jenny, we can, we'd love to hear a quick response, and then it's time to wrap up.
All right, thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. I would just echo what Beth Rose said, and I think something as researchers, when we are applying for grant funding, we need to think about equitable allocation of funding to our tribal partners so that they can meaningfully engage in our projects. And also acknowledging them as co-researchers. They are researchers, as you heard today. There's tremendous wisdom that can really inform the science that we do. So again, just reiterating the importance of uplifting Indigenous knowledge and investing in the partnerships in meaningful ways so that everyone can participate, equitably and share ownership over the process.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to thank all of the presenters and the organizers for such a wonderful session this morning.
Thank you, Cliff, and thank you all of our speakers for such a moving panel. We're now going to take a 5-minute break, so this gives you a chance to stretch, and please come back right at 10:25. And please join me in welcoming Christina Snyder, Tribal Advisor to Governor Gavin Newsom and Executive Secretary of the Native American Heritage Commission, who will be moderating the next panel. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and it's my pleasure to join you for this virtual gathering. We're now starting the panel on inspirations for accountability from land-grant university siblings. Again, my name is Christina Snyder, and I'm a member of the Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians and the Tribal Advisor for Governor Gavin Newsom here in California. I'd first like to acknowledge that the land I'm joining you from today is the original homelands of the Patwin peoples. I also want to thank this team for bringing us all together while so many throughout the state are struggling with the impacts of COVID-19 and wildfire. Before we get to our esteemed presenters, I'm excited to share with you some of the important initiatives the governor's forwarded in his time in office to frame this discussion and how we've approached this work. During his time in office, the governor has demonstrated a developed understanding of the complex issues facing California Native Americans and a willingness to do better. His approach in doing this work is grounded in the history of this state and its treatment of California Native Americans since its inception. In working from this viewpoint, the state is in a better position to address current and ongoing systemic problems in engaging and integrating California Native Americans and their valuable contributions by taking a critical and honest look at the historical root for these issues and the state's role in that history. As many of you are aware, the state has a long history of ignoring, disregarding, or excluding California Native experiences from its work across issue areas. In June of last year, the governor issued an executive order apologizing on behalf of the state of California to California Native Americans for the state's role in its genocide of California Native Americans. In addition to apologizing, the executive order established the Truth and Healing Council, which is responsible for bearing witness to, recording, examining existing documentation of, and receiving California Native American narratives regarding the historical relationship between the state of California and California Native Americans in order to clarify the historical record of such relationship in the spirit of truth and healing. It's also able to look at reparations and restoration of historical and ancestral and cultural rights. Of particular relevance to this conversation, it's possible that the council could examine the systemic and intentional destruction of Native ancestral lands and resources as part of its work. And the council has been authorized to examine and make recommendations aimed at that reparation and restoration. The Native American Heritage Commission, where I also serve as executive secretary, has just released a mapping tool which will be critical to the Truth and Healing Council's work. The mapping tool helps users to visualize California before, during, and after European occupation, with a focus on the Native American experience and linked to primary source evidence presented by Benjamin Madley in his 2016 book, An American Genocide. That tool is called the Digital Atlas of California Native Americans, and it's available at the NAHC website. We continue to support and expand this tool to incorporate information as it's received by the council, which could include primary source materials and testimony on the systemic and intentional destruction of Native ancestral lands and resources by early state actors. I'd also very quickly like to touch on the recent policy issued by the governor on Native American ancestral lands, which tiers from the governor's apology executive order, because it's really the anchor for all the work moving forward by the state to revive and reintegrate Native Americans, their experiences, and knowledges into their ancestral spaces, and seeks to amplify the work the state has been able to do up to this point in working in partnership with California tribes. Last month, the governor issued a statement of administration policy on Native American ancestral lands to encourage state entities to seek opportunities to support California tribes' co-management of and access to natural lands within a tribe's ancestral land that are under the ownership and or control of the state of California, and to work cooperatively with California tribes that are interested in acquiring natural lands in excess of state needs. I'm happy to talk about that a bit more, but I am not the presenter on this, and I want to get to our presenters. So Yowie, and it is now my pleasure, without further ado, to introduce Professor Stephen Kantrowitz from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who will speak a bit about the initiatives they're lifting up right now. Time of COVID, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yes, hi, and thank you to Rosalie and to Finocia for inviting me to present on behalf of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm speaking to you today from Tejope, or Four Lakes, which is part of the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk people. And I acknowledge that history as a way of opening up a brief account of UW-Madison's relationship to colonial land taking, past, present, and future, with regard to the Ho-Chunk in particular, and also to the 11 other First Nations whose homelands lie within the borders of Wisconsin. I have just a couple of points to make in a couple of minutes today. And the first is to situate the findings of the Land Grab Universities project in the broader context of land grabs by grant and by treaty in present-day Wisconsin. Let me just share my screen here. So obviously, because of the moment of its settlement in 1848, or its state in 1848, lots of Wisconsin lands were engrossed by the 1862 Morrill Act, mostly by institutions, as you see here, from other states. The University of Wisconsin-Madison was the beneficiary of some tens of thousands of dollars worth of land, now accounting for approximately $300,000 in value, which, as a share of the UW's endowment is, of course, quite small, But this is misleading only because the University of Wisconsin was the beneficiary of many other state land grants, which we are in the process of trying to research. Unfortunately, the Office of the Commissioners of the Public Lands in Wisconsin, like everything else, is closed. So we're unable to get at those records now. But primarily, University of Wisconsin-Madison has been the beneficiary of the coerced Treaty of 1832, which was forced upon the Ho-Chunk by the United States government in the aftermath of the conflict known as the Black Hawk War. The University of Wisconsin was chartered just 16 years later on lands represented in that TAN 1832 cession on the right-hand map here. Like most other settler institutions, UW-Madison has rarely acknowledged, let alone reckoned with its settler colonial history. And as a state institution, it's only recently begun to serve the state's Native people and communities. The first known Native American graduate of the university was not until 1946. Native American student organizations did not begin until 1968. American Indian Studies was begun as a program in 1972. Native American students remain a tiny percentage of the campus population, a student body of 45,000, approximately 600 Native American students at most recent count by self-identification. There are, however, some really important landmarks in the state and the institution's relationship. Did my screen share just fail there? We'll go to the next slide then. Yeah. Or maybe I can do that from here. Let's see.
No, you can't. Hang on just one.
In 1989, a series of laws known collectively as Act 31, passed by the state of Wisconsin, required the teaching of the history, culture, and tribal sovereignty of the First Nations of Wisconsin. This sounds great. It, however, is an unfunded mandate and has only really been fitfully pursued kind of as particular educators and school districts have found it important to do so, and not where they haven't. But there have been some significant efforts to advance it, in particular through the UW-Madison School of Education. And some of these efforts led, next slide if you will, to a really important development, which has been central to the University of Wisconsin's reimagination of its relationship with the First Nations of Wisconsin, and that is what we call what's called the Cultural Landscape Tour. 10 years ago, closer to 15 years ago, a series of educators on campus, all academic staff, Aaron Birdbear, Rebecca Comfort, and more recently Omar Poehler, began to give what's called the First Nations Cultural Landscape Tour. And this is a tour around parts of the central campus of the university, reimagined through Native American history and culture. And reimagining in particular the space in its 12,000 year history, not just in the 150-year history represented by Euro-American settlement. This is a really, really powerful education for all kinds of student groups, from off campus, on campus, staff, faculty. My own relationship to the campus and to the study and teaching of Native American history was revolutionized by taking this tour with Aaron about a decade ago. They've given more than 1,000 tours to date and continue to do so. When Aaron began giving this tour, his joke, or at least at the time I thought it was a joke, was that his whole goal was that the official red shirt badger tour of the UW campus given by the visitor center would begin with the subordinate clause, occupied continuously for more than 12,000 years, comma. And lo and behold, 10 years later, we're there. And the official campus visitor center tour now uses the material developed by the First Nations Cultural Landscape Tour and talks about tribal sovereignty and talks about the Ho-Chunk history and the deeper Native history of the campus and the region. This led to a reimagining of how campus signage worked. And that sounds very minor, except that in trying to come up with signs that would reflect certain aspects of this history as reflected on the tour, it quickly became apparent that the campus had to engage directly with Ho-Chunk Nation, headquartered a couple of hours to the northwest in Black River Falls. and a multi-year collaborative effort back and forth between campus constituencies and Ho-Chunk Nation constituencies, sharing ideas, text, concerns, finally produced, next slide please, a marker. Again, sounds small.
Coming right up.
Okay. Marker. It's on the top of, near the top of the central hill on campus, Bascom Hill, and it's called Our Shared Future. And it reads, "The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin." Now, like anything else, like any land acknowledgement, but this is not officially that, this by itself is just words. But what's happened? Well, if we can get this slide share back up, I can show you in the next thing, but I can also just describe to you what happened. At the unveiling of this marker in June of 2019, the campus representatives of the campus traveled up to Black River Falls, invited Ho-Chunk leadership to come to campus for a ceremony unveiling this marker. And in June of 2019, in fact, Ho-Chunk dignitaries, including then President Wilfred Cleveland of Ho-Chunk Nation, came to campus. The Ho-Chunk legislature came down and had a special session on the UW-Madison campus. And in a ceremony marked by speeches by President Cleveland and by UW-Madison Chancellor Rebecca Blank, there was a promise by the Chancellor to make this more than words and to help move the campus from ignorance to awareness. Those were her words. This has led to two, can I have the next slide after this one? This was a picture taken at the ceremony. This led to two really important developments. The first was to really dramatically raise the profile of Native American issues and constituencies on campus through two major staff appointments. First, Aaron Birdbear, the originator of the campus tour, has become the Director of Tribal Relations in the Vice Chancellor's office. This is parallel to Director of Federal Relations, Director of State Relations, Director of Community Relations. So we now have a Director of Tribal Relations. And also the establishment within the Provost's office of an Indigenous Education Coordinator, led by another staff member who is one of the leading lights in the Cultural Heritage Tour, the First Nations Landscape Tour, Omar Polar. Together, Aaron and Omar are helping, along with faculty allies and some administrative allies, promote a program based on the marker and the Chancellor's commitment to it called Our Shared Future. And this is an ongoing program of events, workshops, classes, led by units across the campus. It's led by faculty and staff. It's supported by institutionally and financially through the Provost's office, coordinated by Omar Polar. Its marquee event is a Treaty Day event, September 15th of each year, to educate the campus about treaty rights, especially about the 1832 treaty with the Ho-Chunk. Engagement with thousands of students through dozens of classes has gone forward under this, even under COVID circumstances. What's next? We're working on an institutional land acknowledgement process in a big collectively governed institution. That's a complicated process, as you can imagine. But more concretely, partnerships between the UW-Madison and the College of the Menominee Nation and the Lakota Ojibwe Community College is providing $500,000 in grants for students. The Chancellor's funded UW Public History Project is collaborating with Our Shared Future to recover and explore the campus's settler colonial history, including land grabs and treaties, but also student, faculty, and staff experiences over the history of the campus. Other things that I think have to be on the agenda now include reparations for the land grabs, certainly including free tuition for Ho-Chunk and perhaps other tribal members in the state, perhaps based in the value of the land grants taken in 1862 and the other land grants when we were able to finally research them. These are just some of the things. I'm looking forward to hearing what my colleague at Michigan State has to say about what they've done, because I believe that they're well ahead of us in some respects here. But I hope some of this is at least useful as a comparison for things that have happened or may still happen at the UC campuses. So thanks.
Thank you, Professor. And as a reminder, we may have some time for questions at the end, but we'll let our next presenter speak. And if there are questions, we'll go through them in the comments and chat window. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Christy M. Poitra. And if I pronounce that wrong, I apologize. And you can yell at me now, and it's okay, and I'll take it. The interim director of the Native American Institute at Michigan State University. Dr. Poitras.
Everyone, give me 1 second to share my screen. So good morning, everyone. I am so glad to be here. My name is Dr. Christy Poitras. I am the interim director of the Native American Institute at Michigan State University. I'm also affiliate faculty in American Indian and Indigenous Studies and core faculty in the Center for Gender and Global Context. So first, I want to start off with an acknowledgement. I want to recognize the Indigenous communities, historic and present, from the homelands that UC Berkeley occupies. I always preface land acknowledgements with the purpose of a land acknowledgement is to recognize and respect and affirm the relationship between communities and the land. Although land acknowledgements are incredibly powerful statements, they are only meaningful when they are coupled with authentic and sustained relationships with communities. So before I jump into my presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit about my positionality and how I understand my role in the university. So I am a mixed race Native. My father is a citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in North Dakota. My mother is Latina. I am Puerto Rican, Colombian, Spanish, Native, and white. How I think about myself in the context of this work as a first generation college graduate is that I incredibly value collaboration, also education. And I also think of my leadership in the context of the work of my father, who modeled for me through his work at Indian Health Service as a tribal outreach person. He actually recently retired, but I grew up traveling up and down California to different communities and learning about different communities through his work, and his work inspired me to think of leadership as in service to communities. So I want to say before I talk about some of the initiatives at MSU, the heart of this work is collaboration. We have 6 organizations and units on campus that are Native focused. We have EAGLE, which is the Faculty and Staff Association, American Indian and Indigenous Studies, my unit, the Native American Institute, the Indigenous Law and Policy Center, the North American Indigenous Student Organization, and the Indigenous Graduate Student Collective. We all work very closely on programming, community outreach, and support. So none of this work is solely mine. It is a team of people, a team of Native people and allies that help support this work. So I often get asked, what is NAI? Generally, an institute is a unit tasked with education, research, and/or service activities. It is sometimes an outward-facing department. The Native American Institute was founded by George Cornell in October of 1981. In 2003, we became a unit in the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So our core values is we collaborate with communities based on what communities want. We consciously honor Native cultures, traditions, knowledges, and languages and practices. And we specifically support scholarship and programming and research with practical application in American Indian and Indigenous contexts. So some of our areas of focus for the office, we administer 2 endowments for Native students, undergraduate and graduate students. We also have an emergency loan fund that we administer. We engage in campus programming, extensive campus programming that ranges from consultation on research proposals to symposiums. We engage in community outreach, which includes working with tribal colleges throughout the Great Lakes region. We also support tribal projects throughout the Great Lakes region, and we engage in applied research. So a little bit more about the endowments and the student loan funds. The John R. Winchester Endowment Fund was established in 2001 to honor Native undergraduates who demonstrate a strong commitment to the American Indian community and campus community through NASO. We also have the Emma Shore Thornton Endowment Fund, which is focused on undergraduate and graduate students who want to pursue academic excellence and pathways focused on supporting Native people. And the Winchester Emergency Loan Fund provides tribal members with short-term loans to use for things like textbooks, computer purchases, things like that to help them make the transition into the university. So here are some pictures of programming. On the left side, this was from our Black Ash basket making workshop last fall. The focus of the workshop was to really look at the impact of climate change on black ash harvesting. We had an artist come in and she sort of talked about invasive species and how that's impacted her ability to continue her art. Participants were from all backgrounds. We had community members, we had faculty, staff, and students. We all came together to weave a basket and learn about the impacts of climate change. The next photo to the right is a talk with Shannon Martin from the Zeebwing Center at Saginaw Chippewa community. She talked about current and historic roles of Anishinaabe women and those who identify as two-spirited. It was a talk in which she brought in cultural artifacts and talked about stories, and it was really focused on gender empowerment. A good chunk of the attendees, again, were a mix of community members, faculty and staff, and students. And my favorite picture, this third one in the top row, is of a giant paper check. We had received a grant from one of the tribal communities in state to carry out a symposium. The symposium was focused on acknowledging and remembering the Treaty of Saginaw, which ceded the territory for MSU's campus. And so we brought together community members, centered community voices for the specific purpose of understanding the impacts of treaties, the impacts of treaties that have not been honored, and also some of the programming that tribes are engaging in throughout the state. In the bottom corner, we have the Indigenous Graduate Student Collective. I work closely with American Indian Studies to, hold on 1 second, I have an issue, a tech issue. Can you hear me? I'm kind of pausing out. Can someone give me a thumbs up?
Yes,
we can hear you.
Okay, good, good. It started pouring and then all of a sudden it started cutting out. Sorry about that. So the Indigenous Graduate Student Collective is a symposium that we annually put on every year with American Indian Indigenous Studies, the Indigenous Graduate Student Collective. And the purpose of that work is to provide a platform and an opportunity for our students to talk about the research, to engage with other scholars, to engage with faculty. And it's a great opportunity for students to sort of become more comfortable with their academic identities. And then finally, the center picture is Native graduation that we work collectively on. We think it's really important to honor the achievements of our Native students. And so every year we bring students together from high school all the way to law school and doctoral studies to honor those graduates. And it's a community-based event in which we have food, speakers, drummers, because it's so important to acknowledge that education achievement. And then finally, I have a picture here of some game pieces. I had the wonderful opportunity to collaborate with Dr. Elizabeth LaPonce to do Indigenous gaming focused on bringing together Indigenous knowledges with the concepts of gaming, in which students sort of explored the types of games that they were interested in developing. And it was a several-day workshop with the Indigenous Youth Empowerment Program. We also think it's important at NAI to invest in education materials that can be used for faculty and staff and students. So here's a couple examples. Again, I collaborated with Elizabeth LaPonce to develop an honoring community card. The purpose of the card was to sort of, on one side of the card, there was Dr. LaPonce's art. And then on the back, we have what you see here, which is honoring community, respecting, listening, be giving. And it really, the purpose of the card was to sort of get people to think of what does collaboration look like with tribal communities? And how can we be better within the university at supporting tribal communities and engaging and conducting outreach? We also developed a guide to land acknowledgement. The land acknowledgement, for us, we really wanted to help folks understand that it's a responsibility as much as it is a statement, and that with the responsibility of giving that statement also needs to come with action. And then finally, for community outreach, we support a lot of program evaluations. One project in particular is focused on providing evaluation services for tribal college students around agriculture curriculum. We also support community organizations and kind of thinking through their strategic plans or brushing up on their strategic plans. And we work on collaborating with community events around feasts, youth summer programs, things of that nature. This picture here is actually an event that was co-sponsored between Gitagan, which is the community garden in town, and NAI. The focus was to winterize the garden. So we had already harvested from our heirloom seeds, and we brought in folks from all walks of life. It was open to the public to come in and help us winterize the garden and put up a fence and things like that. And then finally, applied research. Here is an example of a recent workbook I developed with several colleagues who are scientists and brilliant. And the focus of the workbook was really to think about how can we train faculty to better mentor Native students within STEM, within science fields. Right now we are funded through USDA NIFA to put together a program for Native undergraduate students to get them interested in agriculture. And a component of that project is also using this workbook to train faculty to be better mentors to Native students. And with that said, I want to thank you all. Miigwech. Here is my email if you feel like reaching out to me, my social media handles, and the website for NAI. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you to our presenters. We are at time, but I think it might be useful if anyone has any short questions. It looks like...
Christina, we have gotten some really interesting questions. Is it okay if I ask a couple of them from the chat?
Yes, please. Okay,
thank you. So this is a question for Stephen. So thank you, Stephen. Are the positions you announced, the Director of Tribal Relations and Indigenous Education Coordinator, only associated with the university, or are they also integrated into cooperative extension? And if not extension, do you know what efforts are occurring within cooperative extension for such types of positions? This is from Dorina Espinosa.
So under the Walker administration, cooperative extension was actually folded into UW-Madison. So there no longer is a sharp administrative distinction between them in Wisconsin. So some of the distinctions that would be important in other states where those are really sharp distinctions aren't so important anymore for us. And I think in particular, Aaron Birdbear's mandate as Director of Tribal Relations covers some of the waterfront that an extension position would have. Omar's is a campus position, quite explicitly.
Thank you. And Christina, if you had questions, we do have time for one or two questions that we could do, if you have questions you would like to ask.
I think I didn't, but I am going to ask one question. For campuses looking to integrate some of these initiatives, I think at the UC in particular, it's probably similar at your campuses, but there's some kind of structural bureaucracy types of things to navigate. So how could other campuses, like at the UC, where should they start with all of this? And how can they get that buy-in from their institutions to do more?
So I find in my experience that a lot of this work is relationship based, whether that relationship is with an associate dean or a dean that you're talking to about land acknowledgements, whether that's advocating for a Native student with the financial aid office, whether that is working on a project with tribal communities. Sorry, it's very ominous. There's a lot of thunder and lightning going on right now. But with that said, I find that relationships are really at the heart of this. And for MSU, it sort of started with our community, our campus community, coming together and sort of developing rapport with each other and thinking through, what kind of programs do we want to see on campus? What are the initiatives that are important to us? And, even at one point for our American Indian Studies retreat, we've developed a strategic plan of where we'd like to see the university in 5 years. And we continue to work towards those goals.
Wonderful.
I just want to quickly echo, yes, relationships, associate deans, vice provosts, the people who actually make the machine turn, developing those relationships and pulling those people so they're invested in these projects is the way to go.
Great. And then one just quick more question, because I think in California, things are interesting across all of this work. And so I'm wondering how you think that, tribal nations, tribal communities, universities can help to elevate some of the visibility issues that we see in California, because I think a lot of the work that you're doing is just wonderful and a wonderful model to be able to do. And I'm wondering if you struggle with the same visibility issues with tribes in your state. Here, we have a lot of miseducation, a lot of erasure. And so in even approaching these issues, there's kind of, grades of where people's comfort level is in even addressing Native issues. So you'll meet with one institution or one professor, and their idea is basically that everybody is extinct, even though you're standing right in front of them as a Native person. And then on the other spectrum, you have people, like some of the folks on this call, like Beth Rose Middleton, who are just, in it, they understand it, and they're ready to help. So I'm wondering how, if you have some insight on that.
So from my perspective, I've accepted that this work is about incremental change, and that, within the course of my career lifetime, these issues are not going to be resolved. But what I can do is I can support that incremental change. And I think for us, the land acknowledgement and the use of land acknowledgements at MSU is important. It was an important step, but it's sort of helping people think about how they can keep moving forward and keep that momentum and put it into action. So I think in engaging in this work, it's really important to remember change is slow. Bureaucracies are designed to change slowly, and it takes time.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time. And there are always going to be moments where it's possible to press the claims more forcefully. We happen to be in one of those moments because of the comparative political visibility of some of the tribes in Wisconsin, and because the chancellor and the provost decided that this was something they really cared about and wanted to advance as part of their legacy for the campus. So we're in a great moment for raising issues, raising visibility, but of course, a little bit of personnel change and that can all go away. So we have to be working on the foundation and on the creation of sustainable resources for this work past the time when this chancellor and this provost disappear.
Thank you, Christina and Christy and Steve for this wonderful panel. We're going to transition now to the audience participatory part, the breakout rooms. This session is going to provide a space for you who are on this call to discuss how UC can take steps to address everyone who joined us in this Zoom adventure, breakout room adventure with this many people. So I hope that each of your conversations were fruitful in the different rooms. We now have an opportunity for the facilitators to report back, and also everyone on the live stream, welcome back. So let's each session will report back for a few minutes, and we'll start. I'm actually seeing Leke on my screen. So let's start with you, Leke.
Thanks, Rosalie. Hi, everyone. So I was facilitating the field stations / UC land group, and we had a very great discussion. And I think sort of 3 to 4 of the main points we discussed kind of revolved around access, sort of forging relationships, and sort of bringing more Native faculty and mentors into our UC systems. And we really talked about, in terms of relationships, really starting at the local scale and really trying to meet with folks at your campus level. We had a great example from out of UCLA of sort of people at that institution really working with Native communities there and the reserve system there to kind of effectively get things done with tribal communities. And in terms of relationships, it's another point brought up was that, we need to look at, some of these successful things that have been going on and some of these relationships that have been forged over all these years and sort of use them as a template of how things can happen at other institutions and with other tribal groups. And in terms of Native faculty, possibly, pursuing Native hiring clusters at different UC institutions so that we can have more Native mentors for Native students that from, California tribes sort of accessing UC institutions. And yeah, I think that's sort of the overall themes of what we discussed.
Thank you so much, Leke. Ateya, I'm seeing you next. So can you share back from your group?
Sure. I was just reviewing our notes, but yeah, so I was in the research group, and the general structure of our group was to try and reimagine what research might look like with Indigenous communities, talk about some of the challenges that we encounter specifically within the UC system, and then to try and identify some actionable steps. And so for what research should look like, you know, we talked about some of the principles laid out earlier by Jennifer Sauerwein and the Kurok collaboration around rebuilding trust, around reciprocity, and decentering the university. And then in terms of challenges, we talked about the invisibility of Native communities, Native and Indigenous communities, and the various starting points that many people come to in these discussions, that some people have no understanding that Indigenous people still exist, and others are very deeply embedded in these issues. And so trying to navigate where to begin when we're all coming from such various starting points. And then when we were talking about actionable items and ways that we can address some of these challenges, we talked about the need for not only Indigenous folks, but particularly for non-Indigenous folks to understand where they come from, understand their own background, that often Indigenous people are asked to share our background and our culture, but that question isn't often reciprocated on the other end, and that really for non-Indigenous researchers, having a solid understanding of your history is important for doing this kind of work and engaging in research with Native and Indigenous communities. And we also talked about the limited resources and limited support, and trying to identify different pressure points or areas where we can push, and that right now we're in a moment that it seems like there are more areas or more openings for putting pressure in key points. And we also heard some ideas for future research around not only around the land grab, so not only the federal land grab, but also doing research into the state land grabs and what were the states doing in addition to the federal government. And we heard from someone who is currently doing some of this work in the law school, more work around the federal land grab, and shared that the University of California, after the Morrill Act was passed, that they actually got 3 times the amount of land that other universities had received, because they were lobbying Congress, and they had a whole committee or group. I'm butchering this because I'm trying to remember, but they had a group that was specifically lobbying Congress for more land. And so I thought that was really fascinating piece of information to come out of our group. And I think that about summarizes it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ataya. And I realize Leke Hutchins and Ataya Seskwich are both doctoral students in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management. I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself. So as we move to our next facilitators, if you can also introduce yourself and where on campus you come from. Louisa, if you can go next. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Louisa. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Assistant Director for Native American Student Development at UC Berkeley. And I was in Breakout Room 2, which was about student development and student experience. I had some great conversations about, what kind of steps we need to be taking, some first steps, which are, knowing your history, knowing your institution's history before you can really move forward. Having an official office. So UC Santa Barbara was in our breakout room, and all of their work is being done by volunteers to support students. So they don't have a tribal liaison, they don't have staff like myself or different offices at UC Berkeley. And then we had some folks from high school who are joining us, who are in high school, and they don't see our campuses in their high schools recruiting their students. So that step of outreach and not only recruiting. And then so we're moving into second steps, retaining the students that we actually have. How are we doing that? What programs do we have to support the students' needs? And then and how are we incorporating that in all of our work, not just relying on, for example, the Native offices on campus to spread communications. It was brought up that, other folks on UC Berkeley's campus weren't aware that we had a new Native recruiter in our admissions office. And how does that communication get spread? So we had folks sign up for our newsletter, but that's only one step. That very centralized just and relying on the Native office. So how can we incorporate it in all of our work? And in general communication and working together, we have organizations across UCs like ACRA, the American Indian Counselors and Recruiters Association, that work collaboratively to support Native students on their recruitment and retention. But we talked about how it needs to be at a higher administrative level in terms of the collaboration that's happening across the universities. And one other thing, of course, we always talked about was financially supporting students while they're at UC Berkeley, and how we can work not only with financial aid, but be a little more radical in thinking about free tuition, et cetera, for Native students. And let me just double check to make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, I think that about sums it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louisa. And next, if we could go to Joseph and introduce yourself, please, Joseph.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Joseph Lindsay. I use he, him as pronouns. I am the Associate Director of Admissions and Scholarship Programs at Berkeley Law. I'm Chemehuevi. I have the honor of working doing the teaching and pedagogy breakout room. And so where the students, where the participants that were in this room actually had various backgrounds. Some of the things that we had as takeaways from it were, where do we start? And also some of them have been doing like one-time events where they have connecting with the community. And so initially the discussion was about what are the things that we can do either in the classroom or to maintain these relationships. And so it reverted back to a lot of the discussion that was already addressed with the panelists, especially like Michigan State, talking about having continued relationships and making sure that they're authentic and that they keep going rather than just having a one-time opportunity. Also talking about the fact that we have where to start is that you've attended this session before. These are great ways to begin to incorporate it within your curriculum or even within your classroom. I'll say that what was interesting about the breakout room is that it actually evolved into a bigger discussion as well. One point that was brought up is that what is the institution doing then? Like it's a bigger picture than outside of just the classroom itself. And it then evolved into community discussion where Val brought up about how the community needs the support of the institution to support the issues that are at hand within the community itself, like legal representation. And so then that brought up how can the law school also help in those efforts, and how can the Native students that are attending law school or even the graduate and professional students, how can they engage with the community? So it really just was a collaborative discussion about not just where we start, but already you could see that people were beginning the connections and sharing emails as far as please reach out to me so that we can discuss and how we can better support not only those at Berkeley or at institutions, but how to support the community at large as well.
Thank you, Joseph. And that's so heartening to hear that exchange that was going on and connections being made. And that's our hope that this will continue. Tiffany, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Santana. I am a financial analyst at Berkeley Haas. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and my ancestors come from the Tecutnet tribe of the Pebble Beach, California area. I was able to facilitate the UC Cooperative Extension breakout group, and overall we were having a feeling of being very how can I say, energized in the sense that there are a lot of people who are frustrated and impatient and of course questioning what's going on at UCs, and it's just very challenging all the way around. But with that, there is a huge want for people to make plans, make change, and they want ourselves and the university to be held accountable. There were a lot of ideas about co-creating solutions with Native American communities, and what really would make that possible is having the legislative and political ability to I think somebody said it's a political dance, right? And so there's lots of finesse that needs to happen in order to have the UC system's support and authority to make some of those things happen. And so with that being said, there are we did briefly talk about the complexity and need to consider tribes, and that some are recognized and some are not recognized. And so that can be a hindrance on the ability of some tribes to have support and additional resources. But there is an overall need to expand out of those pocketed areas that are that do have programs with Native tribes, or that the UC Cooperative Extension, as was discussed, there are some really beautiful programs, but how can we expand those outside of those specific areas, and particularly into urban areas like LA, San Francisco, Oakland, just to name a few. And in addition to creating those relationships between UC and tribes, is hiring a tribal relations officer or creating a tribal advisory council to have those discussions with universities, as well as having really clear expectations and goals and how to collaborate with Native American groups. And of course, there is the Endow Action Now, as was mentioned in our presentation earlier by Bill, that there in the Moral Act is a solution of having 5% of those proceeds go to efforts as these, and really all we need is 1%. But if they could give us that whole 5%, that'd be awesome. But those are just a few of the ideas that we spoke about in our group.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, and everyone who was in that breakout room. And now, Alexi, if you can share about the last room.
Yeah, thank you, Rosalie. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexi Sagona. I'm a second-year PhD student in environmental science policy management and also a member of the Amamutsun Tribal Band. So I'll just kind of go over a couple of the things that were said. So first off, a local Ramaytush Rumsen Ohlone leader spoke about how land acknowledgements first needed to form relationships with local Native peoples and not just one group. And so that's really an important first step of a land acknowledgement, not just a statement, but really those relationships. And then a professor from UW-Madison added that the onus is on the institution to do this important work. It's not on the Native peoples. We also mentioned how a land acknowledgement does not necessarily have to be a statement. It could look like a cultural landscape tour, such as the one at University of Wisconsin-Madison, or it could also look like a class. And a UC Berkeley staff member said that for this case, UC Berkeley, and the particularly problematic history, just one simple statement of acknowledgement without further actions would definitely not be enough in this context. And also that acknowledgement should account for other Indigenous lands that the university has benefited from, as we've kind of heard in the land acknowledgement given by Isha Ray earlier today. And a PhD student from UC Davis, where there is an official acknowledgement, definitely saw this as a floor and not a ceiling. And that was kind of an idea mentioned by Dr. Poitra. One other point was made about being unsure whether it was appropriate or not as a non-Native member of UC Berkeley to create and use an acknowledgement. And I think that kind of is room for greater discussion in the future. And a law student spoke about how a recent event educating the law school on land acknowledgements has already created positive benefits within the law school. And potential outcomes from a good land acknowledgement, kind of envisioning what it could become, it can have all these healthy relationships with the many local Indigenous peoples, and maybe have a native center or a space for tribal people, as Louisa said. And also, you know, these institutional relationships could support tribes' interests in federal or state recognition. And this may be helpful given the context of California with dozens of non-federally recognized tribes. You know, if they want to seek that recognition, the state can maybe have, or universities could have that leveraging power. So that was just kind of a small sample of things. I think it was really interesting to think about what a land acknowledgement could be besides just a statement, and hopefully more thoughts and ideas can come about from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexi, and thank you to all of our facilitators, and for you, everyone in the audience who's started generating these ideas. We see this as a beginning, and from here, we really look forward to where we can go for really taking responsibility as the University of California statewide system for our long overdue restitution to California communities. We're now joined by Margaret Nash, Professor Emerita of Education at UC Riverside, and author of one of the first articles on the topic of the Morale Act and Indigenous land dispossession. Margaret's article actually predates the High Country News piece by a couple of years, and so thank you for putting it in the chat now, Katie. So Margaret's going to offer some remarks on bringing together everything that we've heard today.
Thank you. This is quite a daunting task to try to pull all of this together. You're hearing me okay, right? I can't tell anymore now on my screen.
Yes, we can hear you, Margaret.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I want to start by saying thank you to all of the organizers of this. Rosalie, you're awesome, and everyone, you had such a great team. Thank you for organizing this important symposium. Thank you to the facilitators and all the speakers and all of the participants. This has really been pretty wonderful. I also want to start by saying that I'm no longer in California. I've moved to Ohio. And so I want to acknowledge that here in Northeastern Ohio, the land that I'm currently on is land that was first the Erie and then Mississauga tribes. So I want to acknowledge that. It really is quite daunting to try to sum up this incredibly rich 2 days of this event. There's so much to think about. I've been pulling together what some themes from what I have heard, and I'm sure that each of you would pull together some of the same and some different themes. And I hope that the different threads that we pick out are things that we can, as a group, continue to discuss and as we work on these issues in the future. So just a couple of themes that stood out to me. All of this started because of the history of land-grant colleges and universities. And I think that one of the most salient themes from all of this is that these land-grant issues, they are historical, but they are not just historical. They have such repercussions in the present. And as speakers have pointed out, there is land that is still being held. It's not past, this is present. There's upwards of 500,000 acres still currently held by 16 different universities. Universities are still having, are leasing mineral rights and generating large amounts of income, upwards of close to 9 million in income from these mineral rights in the last year alone. Universities still have endowments based on these land grants. So the roots of this are historical, but the reality and the repercussions are still very present. And as Val Lopez said today, the land is still stolen. That hasn't changed. And so we all have this moral obligation to acknowledge these origins and to work with, as Val Lopez said, to work with tribes to steward the land that is involved. So that's one big theme that I saw about that the history is still very much present with us. A second theme that recurred in nearly every presentation today and last week was about the need for respect and honor. Respect for and honoring of Native cultures, traditions, and perhaps especially relevant for universities is respect and honor of Indigenous knowledge, of the content of that knowledge and also the ways of knowing. We had many great examples of collaborations that reflect that centering of Indigenous ways of being and Indigenous knowledges, including some of the collaborations that do eco-revitalization, the programs that Jennifer Sauerwein and Bill Tripp and then Ron Good and Beth Rose Middleton talked about, the food safety and security issues, the sustaining of seeds that have from culturally important plants, the reforestation. All of those efforts are both collaborative, but also center Indigenous knowledges and show respect and honoring of Indigenous cultures, traditions, and values. A third theme that I heard a lot today, I kind of sum up as the need for patience. Several speakers talked about how slow and incremental institutional change is, and that we have to take step by step and not let those steps that we do take disappear because of not being vigilant in maintaining those steps, the institutional, what am I trying to say, accomplishments that anything around honoring indigeneity on, I'm sorry, I just lost the beginning of that sentence. Steps forward have to be maintained. We can't just rely on once a step is taken that it stays taken, so that we need to be vigilant about the advances that are made, but also to not think that because we have to move by steps and not leaps that it's not worth it. It's each of those steps needs to be valued and celebrated too. Related to that thought about patience is, I think this was Val Lopez also, who talked about the need for healing. And healing too is something that does not happen overnight. And so as we consciously and actively work on healing, we also need to have patience as in how that goes. A fourth major theme that I heard in all of this was about relationships, building, fostering, maintaining, nurturing relationships. And this happens in all kinds of ways. In the work that field stations and extension offices do, in research collaborations, in rebuilding trusts between universities and other state entities and tribal communities, in fostering strong communication links, and also in the very form that land acknowledgement statements make, that if those don't include relationship building, then they are mere statements and aren't as valuable as they could be. So, so building those relationships in every aspect of what we do. And then finally, we heard a lot about wonderful ways to move forward. And there are so many wonderful examples of those kinds of movements now. The examples we heard today of the University of Wisconsin and Michigan State University, for instance, they're committing resources to these issues. They're developing programs and increasing visibility around all of these issues. These are all significant. Other forward movements are continuing to collaborate, building support at high levels of an institution so that the relationships built, there's the relationships again, can be more permanent and not just depend on which individual happens to serve in a particular position. And then finally, and I'll stop, seeing a wide range of scope for change. It's not just some departments in a university or some fields that relate to these issues, but virtually all. And that there are beyond the university, there are legislative and political avenues for change, and that this change and these relationships can be built in urban as well as rural areas. And so my last comment is, I was really struck by a comment that Bill Tripp made. All of this symposium has been generated because of thinking about the legacy of the land grant, the Moral Land Grant, and what a sad legacy it is. And it is in so many ways. And Bill Tripp is calling on us to not just bemoan the legacy, but to change the legacy. We have it in our power to create a new and different legacy that perhaps will be one that we can all be much more proud of. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for that beautiful synthesis of what we have heard today and also on September 25th. So what a powerful symposium this has been. The work does not stop today. Looking ahead, the organizers and the speakers have plans for articles that we want to write about this work, and also for continuing conversations into spring 2021 with additional sessions like these. So please look out for future plans and all of the connections and relationships that we've been trying to build through this, we hope can continue both on the individual and institutional level. In these future forums, in addition to the folks who are highlighted today and the work that's been highlighted, we want to bring in other Native community leaders and scholars throughout the UC system to continue this conversation. Now, I just want to take a final opportunity to just thank all of our speakers. Speakers who are still on the call, please feel free to turn on your videos again so that we can see your faces as we all offer thanks to you. So if you're comfortable, please do that. And then also a final thanks to our event co-sponsors and all of the people behind the scenes, our facilitators and our tech team behind the scenes. If you would like to turn on your video as well, please do. At UC Berkeley, we had Native American Student Development, the Joseph Myers Center for Research on Native American Issues, the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology, the Razo College of Natural Resources, Berkeley Food Institute, Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management, American Cultures Engaged Scholarship Program, Native American Studies, American Indian Graduate Program, the Center for Race and Gender, and the Native American Staff Council. That is a relationship that I haven't seen before in my 12 years working at UC Berkeley. We also had joining us in sponsorship from UC Davis, the Department of Native American Studies, and at UC Riverside, the Rupert Costo Chair in American Indian Affairs, the California Center for Native Nations, the Native American Student Programs, and the Riverside and San Bernardino Native American Community Council, which is a community organization. I did want to highlight that the Joseph A. Myers Center for Native American Issues here at UC Berkeley, who contributed essential financial and support and person power to this event, Deborah Lustig, who's been fearlessly leading us through Zoom, works there. Unfortunately, the Myers Center is actually at risk of closing as part of the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, ISSI, and the Vice Chancellor for Research has decided to close ISSI in 9 months. We're not sure what this means for the Myers Center. I feel that the closing of ISSI will be a great loss to the Myers Center and for the campus and beyond. And we ask that you might join us in helping protest this decision. We've put some information on the chat about that. These conversations about Native American issues sit in the context of all kinds of broader conversations on campus, and we think it's very important to keep this going. I would now like to invite Patrick Naranjo, who's Director of American Indian Graduate Programming here at UC Berkeley, to make an offering to close the space for us today. So thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Rosalie, for putting together this event and all your work in hosting everything. I wanted to start with that. My name is Patrick Victor Naranjo. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a tribal member from Santa Clara Pueblo and a graduate from Haskell Indian Nations University and the University of California, Los Angeles. I embrace a particular focus on cultural property protection, and I did want to mention that right here as a part of my introduction and closing remarks, because that creates my accountability within this space, within the state of California. I am obligated to return to my home community and speak in the same manner that I am today with individuals from where I reside and where I come from. And I wanted to start that off because today we had an opportunity to revisit, if you will, the colonial application that becomes specific to California history and the landscape, right? This morning, I think it was mentioned in the first panel, items such as the Popple Bull or the Doctrine of Discovery, and how those are specifically reinforced through California law, legislation, this event right here that we're hosting today, but also through current issues, right, that are embraced through landscape, burning, food, water, agriculture, and the relationships that have been created from this history at this moment. And so this is quite the opportunity. This is quite the opportunity for us to do something different and to better that engagement and accountability through individuals such as myself who occupy these spaces, but also have an obligation to our home communities, right? And so I did want to mention all of that because this is an opportunity to improve transparency, improve research, but more importantly, revisit the context of California history. One thing that I did want to mention, right, as a part of this opportunity is that by us recreating this engagement, we have an opportunity to also heal. But I want to mention a particular focus on the healing component because I think that that speaks to this opportunity and the history and the purpose of this event. You know, this reconciliation, if you will, needs to have application that is very specific for the history, the current space that continues to inform this legacy, if you will, or the history that has arrived at this moment. And it needs to embrace the contemporary identity of the people that are still here and what has been the result of that process and what creates the barrier for us to move forward. And so I wanted to close that I'm very thankful to be here and provide those remarks as a Native individual, but I did want to focus on working with these kinds of venues to create meaningful healing applications that speak to Native context, very specifically within the state of California, within the institution that has been developed, and to individuals such as myself who occupy that space. Kundawaha, thank you very much for everyone attending this event. And please enjoy the rest of your afternoon and weekend. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for those words. And with that, we will finish out today. Thank you for joining, and we hope to see you in the future.